Between Iran and Oman, there is a strip of water most people never think about. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. On a map, it looks small. In real life, it carries a huge part of the world's energy. In 2025, roughly 20 million barrels per day of oil and petroleum products moved through this one passage. That was about a quarter of all global seaborne oil trade. More than 110 billion cubic meters of LNG also passed through Hormuz that year, much of it from Qatar. So a crisis here does not stay here. Trouble in Hormuz can raise refinery costs in Japan, freight bills in Europe, and inflation in import-dependent countries far from the Gulf. Fuel gets more expensive. Transport gets more expensive. Food and goods can follow. This is not just a sea route. It is a pressure point in the world economy. And the real question is not only whether anyone can legally close it, but whether ships can keep moving through it at a cost and risk the market can bear. The Strait of Hormuz is only about 167 kilometers long. At its narrowest point, it is roughly 39 to 54 kilometers wide, depending on how you measure it. One technical measure puts the tightest span at 24 nautical miles, or about 44 kilometers. Now compare that space with what must pass through it. In 2025, about 20 million barrels a day moved through Hormuz. The main exporters using it included Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, and Kuwait. More than 110 billion cubic meters of LNG also crossed the same route, with Qatar especially dependent on it. There are alternatives, but they are limited. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline can carry about 5 million barrels per day, and the UAE line to Fujairah about 1.5 million. Yet conservative estimates put effective unused bypass capacity at only about 2.6 million barrels per day. That is the problem in plain numbers. Too much energy is being pushed through one narrow funnel, and the backup routes are nowhere near enough. Here is the detail that makes Hormuz feel less like a sea and more like a controlled corridor. Ships follow a traffic separation scheme. One narrow lane for inbound traffic, one narrow lane for outbound traffic, with a central buffer zone between them. That means large tankers are not spreading across open water. They are lining up in predictable tracks, and the nearby islands matter. Keshem, Larak, Hormuz, Abu Musa, and the Tumb Islands sit close enough to help concentrate traffic and make surveillance easier. This is where the danger becomes practical. In May 2019, 4 commercial ships were damaged near Fujairah, just outside the strait. The attacks did not shut Hormuz. They showed something subtler. If ships are forced through narrow, watched lanes, even limited strikes can shake confidence fast. For insurers, that meant recalculating war risk. For ship owners, it meant asking whether a legal route was still a sensible one. That unresolved question carried straight into June and July 2019. On 19th July 2019, the British-flagged tanker Stena Impero entered the Strait of Hormuz, expecting a routine transit. Instead, Iranian forces boarded and seized the ship, taking it toward Bandar Abbas. For the crew, the crisis was not about strategy papers or oil charts. It was immediate. A radio warning. Fast craft alongside. Armed men climbing up. Then the ship changes course, and every ordinary part of shipboard life becomes uncertain. This happened weeks after the 13th June attacks on Front Altair and Kokuka Courageous. so the crew already knew these waters had turned dangerous. But there is a difference between hearing about risk and becoming part of it. The International Maritime Organization responded by calling for safe passage arrangements and international coordination to protect merchant crews. That matters because Hormuz is not only a story about states testing each other, it is also a story about civilian sailors caught in the middle, waiting for politics to decide when they can go home. The pattern in 2019 widened in a way the market could not ignore. First, 4 ships were damaged near Fujairah on 12th of May. Then, on 13th June, 2 more tankers were hit near the Strait of Hormuz. Front Altair and Kokuka Courageous. That sequence mattered because it showed repeated disruption without any formal blockade. No one had declared the sea lane closed. Yet ship owners, charterers and insurers were now pricing in the possibility that another vessel could be next. This is the point where a counter-argument deserves a fair hearing. Some analysts say Hormuz cannot truly be closed for long. International law protects transit passage, and major naval powers would move to keep ships sailing. History supports part of that claim. The strait has never been formally and sustainably shut in the classic blockade sense. But 2019 exposed the weakness in that comfort. Shipping does not wait for a textbook closure. A handful of attacks was enough to make lawful passage feel unstable, expensive, and fragile. So what does closing Hormuz really mean? Not necessarily a visible barrier across the water. A de facto shutdown can happen when mines, anti-ship missiles, drones, seizures, and insurance withdrawal make normal traffic commercially impossible. Mines are especially effective. They are cheap to lay, hard to detect, and they force slow mine-clearing operations in a narrow passage. Even a small number can hold up traffic while navies search, sweep, and escort. And reopening the route is much harder than disrupting it. Protecting tankers means mine countermeasures, air defense, surveillance, route management, and usually several countries coordinating at once. During the tanker war in the 1980s, escorts were needed to keep traffic moving, which is a reminder that this problem is not new. That is the real turning point in the story. The question is not whether a state can lock the strait like a door. It is whether it can raise the risk high enough that ship owners pause, insurers back away, and the market behaves as if the door is nearly shut. In 2026, the warning became a market shock. The Strait of Hormuz was described as being effectively strangled, and Brent crude rose above $100 a barrel. That phrase matters. Not formally closed, not sealed in the old blockade sense. In fact, supporters of the opposing view could still point to the same facts. Transit passage remained the legal rule, and major navies still said the route could be kept open. But the market answered with numbers, not legal theory. Oil moved higher. LNG buyers faced disruption, especially those relying on Gulf cargoes. War risk insurance climbed. Freight costs rose. Some sailings were delayed or cancelled because a voyage that looked possible on paper no longer looked acceptable in practice. This is the moment when Hormuz stops being a regional security story and becomes a global household story. Higher energy costs spread into transport, industry, and food prices. A narrow sea lane between Iran and Oman suddenly showed up in bills paid thousands of kilometers away. The legal answer is still clear. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Strait of Hormuz is governed by transit passage. Ships and aircraft have the right to keep moving through it, and coastal states cannot suspend that passage on their own. The International Maritime Organization has reinforced that view by condemning attacks on shipping and calling for freedom of navigation. So the strongest simple claim is true. Iran cannot legally close Hormuz by decree. But the documentary's verdict has to be more careful than that. In 2019, ships were attacked and the Stena Impero was seized. In 2026, disruption helped push Brent above $100, and the backup routes were too small to replace normal traffic. Conservative estimates put effective unused bypass capacity at around 2.6 million barrels per day, far below the roughly 20 million barrels per day that moved through Hormuz in 2025. So judge future claims by a tougher standard. Do not ask only whether passage is legal. Ask whether traffic can move safely, affordably, and at scale.